I am Ellen Lanier, and I'm teaching this economics class. And we are using the McConnell Brew Flynn book. And I've voiced over some of the PowerPoints for you. They may not all have voiceovers, but I'll just try to go through them and let you know the most important things out of the chapter. So I did cut out some of the slides that were in the PowerPoint that came with your book. So let's take a look at an overview of the chapter. This is just a basic economics class. Econ 201 should transfer just about anywhere as your basic business econ class, and as well as a social science. So we're going to go through the chapter a little bit. The first thing we'll do is just define economics. It's social science. And basically all it is limited resources, unlimited wants. We always are concerned, or should be concerned, about our economy growing. And that growth is defined by GDP. You'll find some of these definitions in your chapter notes in course documents. But GDP, gross domestic product, is the total value of all final goods and services produced in the country. The United States has the world's largest economy. The end of 2019, about $21.5 trillion worth of goods and services produced. And we always would like to see that expanding. When I'm making this video / audio, we are at the end, we hope, of the coronavirus pandemic. And obviously that has slowed our economy down considerably. But what generally does lead to growth in an economy? There's so many things. And as we go through each chapter, I want you to think about the policies that tend to lead to economic growth. We know that international trade is one. Currently, the United States trades with many other countries. China is the largest, and that may be changing due to coronavirus and, of course, Hong Kong's treatment by China. I think that many people, and our government certainly as well, seeks to find some other suppliers rather than China. So we may see that changing. We, of course, trade a lot with Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, and other countries as well. India, big trading partners. I noticed shoes today made in Vietnam and Indonesia. So we trade with a lot of other countries, and that generally leads to growth. Other things leading to growth: education, technology certainly allows us to work smarter, not harder. Lower tax rates, better health, all of those things tend to lead to growth. And of course, our government policies can encourage or discourage growth by some of them. So economics is just the study of scarcity. We always have limited resources. So since we're always facing scarcity, that means that we're always facing something called an opportunity cost. Very important definition. Opportunity cost is what's given up, the highest valued alternative that had to be sacrificed for the option chosen. So we will always face opportunity cost. For example, we have a limited amount of land out there in the United States. About 25, 30 years ago, it was discovered that the bark of the Pacific yew tree could be used to obtain Taxol to treat cancer patients, but it was very expensive, and your opportunity cost of saving a life might have been 3 Pacific yew trees, big old growth trees. Well, of course, the opportunity cost, on the other hand, of not using the bark from those trees would be a human life. So opportunity cost is not an easy concept. We just recognize in economics that we always have them. They're not easily solved. Of course, fortunately, in the quest for profits, many pharmaceutical companies try to find a derivative of that Taxol. They found a synthetic version. I was a cancer patient 10 years ago and took a form of that as a cancer treatment, and it was very effective, and it is very effective for many people. So fortunately, with that profit incentive, an alternative was found, and we didn't have to cut down all the yew trees. But we're always facing opportunity cost at any point in time. And we have to remember that because we're always facing scarcity. We'll not spend a lot of time in marginal analysis. In Econ 201, marginal just means additional. We will look at marginal tax rates in Chapter 20. Taxes, of course, are percentages of income at intervals, at certain intervals, or at certain margins. So resources are limited. So we do have to make choices about the use of those scarce resources for those unlimited wants, and we're always facing opportunity cost. We assume that individuals are acting rationally to better themselves, and that often means bettering society as well. Individuals want to increase their utility, which is just the amount of satisfaction from consuming a good or service. Firms have to make profit to stay in business. And all of these are goals in economics. Marginal benefit, marginal cost, all you really need to know about that is marginal just means extra or additional. Usually we're looking at just one more. So this is macroeconomics, the study of the entire economy. So we'll be looking at GDP, international trade, inflation, unemployment, the money supply, monetary policy. And microeconomics is the study of individual consumers, firms, or markets. In microeconomics, Econ 202, we spend a lot of time on supply and demand, elasticity of demand, the specific business firm, the monopoly, the pure competitor, the oligopoly where you have a few sellers. So macro is a more general study, and this is, of course, macroeconomics. So looking at a country per capita income, I don't really know why this slide is in the chapter, but I think we'll see it again in a later one. But this is just GDP divided by the number in the population. The United States has a very high GDP per capita. There are some countries that have higher GDPs per capita. Generally, they're smaller countries usually as well. But the U.S. has one of the highest. China has a growing GDP per capita, but still, because there are 1.4 billion people there, their GDP per capita is relatively low, but certainly it has gone up dramatically over the past 20 years. And GDP per capita is probably a better measure of standard of living. So let's look at some really important categories. Definitions are important. Everything that we produce in our economy includes land, natural resources used in the production process. The United States has many natural resources. We have a lot of oil and gas, minerals, fertile farmland, oceans and rivers where we can get fish and other resources. So we have a lot of land in the United States. Some countries do not have much usable land. Japan, for example, has no oil and gas. They have very little usable land. It's a very mountainous country, yet they still have a viable economy because they have some of these other economic resources. Labor, physical actions and mental activities, people contribute. There's the physical labor. There are only a limited number of people available for work at any given time. There's also a definition called human capital, that is the education and training of workers, which is very important to modern economies. Capital investment, physical capital, are manufactured resources capable of further production. A fishing pole is a very simple form of capital, much easier to catch fish using that capital than trying to catch fish with your hands. And of course, that's very primitive. Of course, we have robots and computers that allow for further production, but that takes some financial investment. And we have to have capital goods before we can have consumer goods. There had to be a factory or of some kind generally to produce that fishing pole or produce that robot. Another limited resource, entrepreneurship. Human resources that involve risk. The entrepreneur is the risk taker. They innovate, they start new companies, and often bring up society with what they create. Obviously, I don't know what we would do without Bill Gates and Microsoft and what he created. He became a billionaire a very smart man, but we all benefit from what he created. We go back more than 100 years ago, Henry Ford, who was one of the first entrepreneurs to use the assembly line. John Rockefeller, who founded Standard Oil. The price of kerosene, which was their first product, came down because of the entrepreneurial ability and the capital investment from him and his company. More recent, Steve Jobs, of course, and Apple, Elon Musk and his car. So these entrepreneurs involve risk. Entrepreneurship involves risk, and it's a scarce resource because not everybody is willing to do that, to risk their own money or risk trying to gain money from someone else to start a business. So it is a limited resource. So functions of entrepreneurs, they employ the land, labor, and capital, take initiatives, make those decisions, and innovate. But probably the easiest definition when you think of entrepreneur is they take risk, and not everybody's willing to do that, so it is a scarce resource. Let's look at another concept from chapter 1 that's pretty important. This is a very simplistic example, but it's something called the Production Possibilities Model, or PPC, Production Possibilities Curve. And it's an economic curve. It's a model that shows different combinations of two goods that an economy could produce, assuming full employment of the resources. Now, that doesn't mean full employment by just number of employees, but full employment of the resource, meaning not wasting resources, not wasting land or labor or capital or entrepreneurship. There's always at a given time a fixed amount of those resources. Also, at any given time, we have a fixed amount of technology to use. 30 years ago, we didn't have voice recognition. You had to go through the endless pushing buttons on the telephone to get somewhere to a human. We didn't have voice recognition, but now we do. So let's just look at a simplistic model. Every economy needs to produce some goods for the ultimate consumer. And then in order to have those consumer goods, first capital goods may have to be produced. Capital goods, those manufactured resources capable of further production. So let's look at a simple table and say that this particular economy is producing pizzas, which are consumer goods, and industrial robots, which are capital goods. So if the economy only produced pizza, they could produce 400,000. If they only produced industrial robots, they could produce 10,000 and then 0 pizzas. But every point on this, what we call the production possibilities curve, is an efficient use of resources, meaning none are wasted. Doesn't necessarily mean it's an optimal combination, but it is possible. We could produce only 400,000 pizzas or only 10,000 industrial robots, but people want to consume both of those things. So any point below that production possibilities curve is attainable, but important to remember, not efficient. Some resources are being wasted. Any point outside of that production possibilities curve is not attainable. We have to grow the economy in order to attain that new point. But if you're asked what is the opportunity cost of moving from producing 10,000 industrial robots to producing the first 100,000 pizzas, well, the opportunity cost of producing the 100,000 pizzas would be 1,000 industrial robots. What's given up? If we're operating at point B, producing 9,000 and 100,000, what if we moved to point C, produce 100,000 more pizzas? We would give up 2,000 industrial robots. The reason for this is resources are not equally suitable for all production purposes. Some land is conducive to farmland, where we can grow wheat and green peppers and tomatoes and all of those kinds of things that go into pizzas. And then some land is more productive for getting minerals out to make steel and aluminum to produce an industrial robot. So if we kept using more and more of that land to produce more farmland to produce pizza, we would give up increasing amounts of industrial robots because there's some land out there that's just not conducive to farming. Of course we know that. Even farmland in different parts of the country is conducive to growing certain things rather than others. So that production possibilities curve is not a straight line. But, and the reason for that is the law of increasing opportunity cost. That just means resources are not equally suitable for all production purposes. Certainly it takes more resources, for example, to produce an airplane than a car. So we don't have a one-to-one relationship. Now, how do we expand that production possibilities curve? There is only one way to do that, and that is through economic growth. Those factors that we just mentioned, international trade, education, better health, low tax rates, technology, and then over time that production possibilities curve can move to the right, and we can have more pizzas and more industrial robots. Some books will use the example of consumer goods and military goods. I mean, certainly there are a lot of countries out there that have spent so much on their military without growth that their people have had to give up more and more consumer goods and personal goods as a result of that. Fortunately, most of the time our economy is growing, so we don't see that sacrifice very much. So again, let's look at an example, simplistic example. If there's a country called Presentville and one called Futureville, Futureville is producing more goods for the future. Presentville is producing more goods for the present, more consumer goods, which means it may be foregoing producing the capital goods that are used to produce more consumer goods. So over the long term, we would definitely expect the growth rate of Presentville to be lower than the growth rate of Futureville. Again, we don't notice a trade-off in the United States because most of the time our economy is growing, and we have this huge private sector that's investing in capital, and because of that, we can have more and more consumer goods. There's some other factors that contribute to that. Specialization, doing what we do best and sell the fruit of that labor to someone else. International trade. Of course, that there are some trade-offs there. Certainly opportunity cost. There are certain things we don't make at all in the United States anymore. I think a good example of that is what we found out recently with the coronavirus pandemic. Most of the masks and plastic gloves are made in China. And maybe there are some things that we should be able to produce just to make sure that we have supplies of it. And I imagine that we're going to see some pretty dramatic changes over the next few years with trade with China. But we'll have to wait and see on that. So that is the end of Chapter 1. Again, refer to your notes in course documents, and the PowerPoints are there as well.